COVID distancing, I guess. But when he mentioned that, it was a packed house because we all needed our crammed in. And this is a wonderful opportunity. Again, I'm Mr. Partlow, for college counseling here. And this is a panel of 5 colleges that are traveling around right now visiting schools. And they are international admissions reps, but they've been in this business for a long time. I think I heard earlier today, if you were to total up all of their years, it's over 50 years of experience on what we call in the business the other side of the desk. So I'm referring to them as the other side of the desk, and they refer to me as the other side of the desk. So I work in the high school working with students, and they work in admissions offices and financial aid offices. They know what's happening on that side. And so we collaborate with helping students now and families navigate this whole process and head off. And they represent colleges in California and a few other states as well. So they'll introduce themselves. They have a financial aid presentation to give, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. We want to make sure that everybody has kind of the same base knowledge, because we're probably all over the map right now. Some of you maybe have older siblings that have gone through this process, so you might be familiar when you hear FAFSA or Css Profile or estimated family contribution, or whatever it is. And some of you might be like, what did you just say? I don't understand any of those words. So we're going to get everybody a baseline knowledge, and then seize the moment to pepper them with questions, because we have professionals from the other side of the desk, which is a real fortunate offering that we have here at our school. Thanks for that. I'll let them introduce themselves because there are a lot of them. And if you could use the microphone, that would be great. That I should have been doing that. That will help with the recording. Okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Mann-Terry-Stem. I'm the Director of International Enrollment at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, so outside of California. We're really excited to come talk to you about financial aid tonight, even though it's not an exciting topic, but we're going to make it exciting. It's one of those topics that I find with parents that it's very easy to get caught in your head, make it a lot more complicated than it actually is. And so instead of even just saying, you're going to start with some of the basics, and then go through kind of what the timeline, the process is, and what it looks like, as well as a lot of helpful tips that we have for you guys. So before we get started, can I kind of see a show of hands? How many of you have seniors right now?
This is all seniors.
Oh, all seniors. Oh, okay. So you're like really in the thick of this now. Maybe have started your FAFSA last week. Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to quickly introduce my colleagues. This is Logan from Kansas State. This is Adam from Laverne, Kenley from University of Redlands, and Dane from California Lutheran. So, like I said, we're going to start with understanding some of the basics. So sometimes, I find when I'm talking to parents that some of the terms, the basic terms, get a little confused about what they are, what they mean. So scholarships, these are going to be given based off of merit, talent, athletics. This is the most common thing you're going to see, especially in the admissions process. Financial aid is what's going to be given based off of family financial information. This is where things like the FAFSA, Css Profile, and those types of things come in to play. And then grants are usually going to be a one-time or yearly stipend that's given for a combination of those things. They're usually variable each year. Sometimes you might only get it 1 year, you might not get it other years. And then another one that can get a little bit confusing, on-campus jobs versus work study. So work study is technically a federal program that you have to qualify for through your FAFSA. Not everybody's going to qualify for it, but everybody can get an on-campus job, and honestly, work study jobs are the same thing as on-campus jobs. It just comes down to who is paying the hourly rate for that student. And then internships, on-campus, off-campus, paid, unpaid. It says up there that it should directly relate to the program of study. That's technically for international students, it has to directly relate because of their visa. But for U.S. citizens like you guys, It should, of course, relate to what they're studying. You don't want your child working at McDonald's, flipping burgers, and trying to say that's an internship when maybe they could have been working in the marketing department at McDonald's. But like I said, paid, unpaid. I know a lot of us, especially since we're smaller institutions, really believe that these should be paid experiences. These should not be free labor, so we really try to work with students on that. But, like I said, we wanted to start off with some of those basics to make sure we're all on the same page as we go through some of these terms a little bit more in depth. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam to start digging into some of these.
Thanks, Megan. So as Megan said, my name is Adam Blue. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Admission at the University of Laverne, so I oversee the admission and outreach process for our international and our domestic students. Megan talked a little bit about scholarships and financial aid, so we're just going to break down some of the different subgroups within each of these options. So first with our scholarships. The most common what you'll hear about is our merit scholarships, right? So these are scholarships that are typically awarded at the time of admission based on your son or your daughter's academic profile. So these scholarships typically you do not need to apply for. Our admission offices work with the understanding that everyone would like a scholarship, and therefore when we are making admission offers, we typically will decide that merit scholarship amount at the time of admission. Many schools sometimes will put these in the admission letter. Other colleges will also may only put them in the financial aid offer, but know that these are made at the time of admission based on the academic profile, which is typically going to be grades. Maybe some schools might consider extracurriculars like Creighton. But yes, the merit scholarship, that's the first type of merit scholarships. The second one is what some schools refer to as a talent scholarship. So these typically are based on a very specific criteria. The most common one is a talent or a performance scholarship. These are typically in the arts, and oftentimes to be considered for a talent scholarship, your student would need to submit a portfolio of work. So art, photography, dance, theater, and many of us all have a version of a talent or a performance scholarship. The third one is an athletic scholarship. So athletics, called collegiate athletics, is broken down into different divisions. The most competitive divisions, the ones you see on Friday night, Saturday night, football games, things like that, are going to be your Division 1 or your Division 2. Some of these smaller institutions are what we call Division 3, and while it has nothing necessarily to do with the level of competitiveness, it's just as a smaller school, only Division 1 and Division 2 athletics and NAIA are allowed to offer scholarships. Scholarships for athletics is done completely through the athletics office. The admission office will determine if a student is academically admissible, but it's up to the coaches of the respective teams to determine if a student gets an athletic scholarship, and if they are going to get a scholarship, is it going to be a full scholarship, a partial scholarship, things like that. So again, three of the most common types of scholarships. And then we have financial aid, right? So whereas scholarships are awarded based on specific criteria of the student, right? Whether it's academics, talent, athletics, things like that. Financial aid is a little bit of a different process. It's based on need, right? So there's every school in the U.S. does offer financial aid for U.S. citizens, but not every school offers financial aid for international students. So maybe we'll start with financial aid for U.S. citizens. In order to be considered for financial aid, you do need to fill out the FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. My colleagues will talk about that, the timeline, a little bit later in the presentation, but no, that is a must. Do not pass go, and unless you fill this form, you can't be considered for financial aid. Rest assured, if you have all your documents ready to go, it takes about 14 minutes to fill this out, right? And it is something that you will need to fill out every year to be considered for financial aid, which typically comes in the form of either A, government or state grants, loans, or work study, as Megan mentioned. I'm not sure if we have any parents of international students, so I don't know if we need to. We're just focused on. Okay, so the second half. So FAFSA.gov. Again, it is a free application. So if you ever stumble upon a site that says, "Oh, you've got to pay to fill it out," close your browser. It is a free site. It's on the government website. And yes.
Do you want to talk about CSS for domestic? Because a lot of universities require CSS.
Yes. So, thank you, Dave. Yes. So, all schools will require you to file the FAFSA. Some private schools additionally will require you to fill out what's called the CSS Profile. This is an additional financial piece, plus you run by the College Board. This one, there is a fee not to fill that out, but to submit it to each school that requires it. Again, typically it's private schools. Some private schools require it, some don't. You'll find in college admissions, anytime you ask a question, we will always answer your question with the word "it depends" before we answer that question. So, and again, the big thing with the FAFSA is you want to make sure if you have your tax documents ready to go to fill it out. There's a new thing called prior. So, we'll talk about the timeline later on, but know that you don't need to rush to fill out your taxes on January 1. Prior, you can use your previous year's taxes to fill out the FAFSA.
Alright. Thanks, Adam. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the other ways to help fund studies beyond financial aid and scholarships. We've touched on these a little bit, but want to give a little bit more detail. So campus employment, whether your child qualifies for federal work study as part of a financial aid package or not, they can apply for a campus job starting the very beginning of their studies at their university. And often universities will actually give them access to the student employment website as part of like a summer orientation program. And then many universities will host job fairs. They'll have an involvement fair during orientation, and then within the first week or two, they'll actually have a job fair where offices that are hiring student workers will come out and they can actually interview. What that means for you is if you are encouraging your student, I think in most cases, I think it's good for students to have a campus job. Maybe think about, are they ready for, they don't necessarily need to have a professional resume, but start to have conversations with them about what it means to interview for a job. What are the ways they can present themselves at those campus job fairs? Maybe give them some tips on things that you might have learned in your own life, your own experience interviewing for jobs, or maybe interviewing people for jobs, and things that they can do to really stand out. I think it's a good balance for students to have campus jobs. Now, the hours that it says here is 20 hours per week. Most universities really only let students work about 10 to 15 hours a week. They try and limit it. Being an RA is about 20 hours a week, but that's not something they would want to do maybe until their second or third or fourth year. So it's really about balance. And I think for students, even if the student doesn't need to work, I think having them develop skills, develop a resume, and also contribute to their education is really important developmentally. So it's a good way to help reduce the tuition price maybe, but more about paying for books. Because on average with California state minimum wage, I think it's $15 an hour, it's going to go up a little bit this January. That student, it's not going to be more than maybe $3,000 a year that they might make in a campus job. So it's not going to make or break tuition, but every little bit helps. It will definitely pay for their books and maybe travel costs and some other things. And again, there's so many different campus jobs. You know, working at the front desk in the athletic center or waiting tables in the campus dining facility. There's a lot of different things. Yeah.
I'm curious, with campus employment, is the student just paid directly, or is it offset tuition or fees or something, or how does it usually work?
Yeah, student account offices will actually, there's some universities will actually work with you so that it's applied to their balance, but most will pay directly to the student. But that's something you can typically arrange with the student accounts and the student employment office.
Because if they're covered through, say, scholarships or other things, they can still do that, just earn money on the side.
Yeah, in most cases they will get paid this, every other week paycheck. Yeah, exactly. So then there's also co-op programs. Co-op programs. We talked about this in terms of paid or non-paid internships. Some universities, they kind of label or package internships as a co-op program where the student might actually take a semester off from their studies and work full-time. There's some universities that do that and provide a much more in-depth experience. Other universities will offer an internship or help you find an internship. And again, as Megan said, we really want students to find paid internships that are connected to their field of study. In many cases, the students will actually get college credit for that internship. So almost like an independent study, they might work, if maybe it's a student studying archival history. We're really close to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum. We have students that are working in the archival section, getting course credit for the History Archives program while also getting an internship. And so definitely a chance to be able to get some experience and earn some money in many cases as well. And then of course here, students have the opportunity to take AP classes. Any of your children taking AP exams in this coming year or starting junior year? So that, you may not think about that as scholarship financial aid, but every credit that they bring in are fewer credits than to take the university. So the student has multiple AP exams that they can transfer in credits to the university. They could graduate 3.5 years instead of 4. That half year of tuition, that's a good scholarship. In some universities, that might be $20,000 less that you're paying based on the credits that the students are earning through AP exams. Students are already feeling a lot of pressure, so you can decide as a parent how much that adds to the pressure of AP exams, but something to think about as well. Transfer credits, so if students have an opportunity over the summer to maybe come back and take junior college credits, between their freshman and sophomore year, those things, as long as they're working with the university and their advisor to make sure that they're taking the right courses, those are all going to be transferable in. In the state of California, any course that's taken at a community college that's UC or CSU transferable, private universities will take as well. So that's another way to help kind of reduce the time to graduate and also the costs as well. And then of course there's loans. Some universities might loan directly, although for the most part it's through the federal loan programs. There are two main parts of the loans that students will be eligible for that are really important for you as parents to know. So there's the federal Stafford loan program, which has both subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Those are in the student's name. The subsidized loans are such that the interest rate is frozen, there's no interest that's accruing on that student loan during the time of their studies until about 6 months after they graduate. Unsubsidized loans are also in the student's name, but the interest is building and accruing while they're in school. They don't have to make any payments on it, but it is slowly building up. And the interest rates are very low. I think it's like 4.2% right now, much better than you might get in most bank loans or private lenders. The third type of loan that does impact you are the Parent Plus loans. And these are loans that would be taken out in your name. The repayment plans start right after the disbursement of those funds. And so right now, one of the things I'm a little concerned about is we see these waves in California where housing or house prices are going up so much. A lot of families are kind of borrowing against or taking out more plus loans because they see the value of their homes going up. But then we saw it happen in 2008, and a lot of families leveraged their home perceived value to help pay for college, but then housing prices went way down. So just something to think about, and if you have questions about some of those things, we can get into that. So that is pretty deep in the weeds of the additional kind of ways of funding education. So I think next Logan's going to kind of break down how we put together financial aid packages.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so we're going to go through kind of like more like a budget on how to actually break down what the total cost of attendance looks like. So two terms that you'll hear, two phrases you'll hear is direct university costs and indirect costs. So direct costs are just those that are being paid directly to the university. So obviously tuition, fees, on-campus housing, those are going to be those options that you're going to be paying directly to the university. So that's what you'll see on your student's bill when you receive that in the mail or through the student portal, whatever. Additional fees, one thing to think about with that is that there might be college-specific fees. There might also be fees for like student services, like using a recreation complex, that sort of stuff. Those are going to be kind of delineated on that specific budget line item. In addition to that, we'll have health insurance. So at most universities, I think probably all universities in the U.S., it is required for students to maintain health insurance while they're on campus, while they're a student there. So most universities do offer university health insurance if they're not able to provide it through like your health coverage or whatever. So that might be an additional line item that you'll see on there. I know for our international students, they're typically automatically enrolled unless they waive it, but for the U.S. citizens, they usually have to seek that information out. Indirect costs, so travel and transportation are going to be if you're going out of state, if your student is going out of state, or if they intend on taking their car, what is parking costs in those areas. So this is more coming down into like these are the areas that you can really kind of start to have more flexibility based on you and your students' kind of spending plan, what they are intending to spend during that time, if they intend to take their car with them, how much they intend to drive around, if they intend to take public transportation, if they intend to walk different places, that sort of stuff. Technology, One thing with technology is understanding the specific type of program that your student will be studying in. So if you're studying an architecture program, they might be recommending that you are buying a MacBook. Or if you're studying in our aviation program, we require each of our students to purchase an iPad that they load their flight apps onto. So understanding what technology is specifically required or recommended by that program might change those costs a little bit. So if you have questions about that, if you think that your student might be going to a program that might have a little bit more of a specialized technology, ask your admissions representative or ask the college about that. They can definitely talk to you more about what they're looking for, what they're seeing their students investing in, and what they really, really recommend to make sure their students are successful. Books, that one again, there can be a lot of flexibility within books, so you don't necessarily have to just purchase books like you used to now. There's a lot of online book options, there's a lot of rental options for books. I know for myself, I kind of wait about a week to see if I'm going to enjoy the class, if I think it's going to be something I'm going to refer back to a lot throughout my coursework. Then I go ahead and purchase the book. If not, then I might just rent it from the library, or check it out from the library, or rent it from Amazon. And then personal expenses. This is where there's the most flexibility, obviously, going in. Like, how much does your student intend to eat out? How much they intend to cook for themselves? All those things, like how much they intend to go shopping, all that kind of stuff calculates into it. So I do recommend having a conversation with your student and sitting down and really building those personal or those indirect expenses, and really kind of teaching those moments of like how to stick to a budget, that sort of stuff. Here on the next slide, we'll go over kind of like what it looks like when you're getting those direct expenses or those direct costs from the university, what those look like. So we have broken down 3 different universities, and you can see they're all different costs for each of them. So it is important as you are searching through or kind of narrowing down that search with your student that you consider not just that total cost or what that final number is, but what is the percentage of that scholarship they're getting. You know, if you're getting a $50,000 scholarship, but it costs you $150,000 to go there, but then you're getting a $5,000 scholarship from a different school that only costs $10,000. It could make a difference. So really start breaking, those are terrible examples, sorry, but you can, the easiest off the top of my head. Math is not my major, but it gives you a great opportunity to really to figure out what that percentage, what that total cost is, that out-of-pocket cost. To see, you know, it might have a flashy dollar sign on that scholarship, but when you look at it in proportion to everything else, it might not come across as quite as positive. So really think about that as you're going through, and breaks down like the individual costs. You'll see those work studies on there. You'll see what loans are on there. Again, being able to break down, figure out what your student is going to have to pay back, what is money that is being given to them or granted to them either through the U.S. government or from their school that they're attending, any additional scholarship options. So this will just show scholarships and grants that are being offered from the U.S. government, from that FAFSA, or from the university. If they have any private scholarship dollars, those may not be reflected on there, but every university has a way that you can report those back to them. So if you have a local organization, a religious organization, or a community organization that is granting a scholarship to your student, that can always be reported to the university, and again, that can just be added to your personal budget, but it may not be reflected on what the university is giving to you. Here on our last slide, figuring out your own budget. Think about what you're going to need to know, what those additional expenses are, what those indirect costs are. So we at the universities, we will do our best to give you everything that we can in terms of the budget that we can provide you, like what scholarship we're going to provide. But you will have to have a conversation and kind of sit down and do those indirect costs on your own. So I do recommend having that conversation. One thing to consider is the cost of living varies all across the United States. So contact your university, have a conversation with the admissions reps there. They can kind of give you a solid idea. They should be able to sit down with you and kind of walk you through line by line and assist you in building that budget. We survey our students every couple of years to ask them how much they're spending outside of the classroom or how much they're spending off campus, just so we can have a really solid idea of what that cost of attendance actually is. So ask the admissions representative. They should be able to give you the information for that school within the last couple of years as well. And I will turn it over to Julie.
All right. Good evening. My name is Ken Lee Jones. I serve as the Senior Associate Director of Admissions for the University of Redlands in Southern California. I'm a huge Seahawks fan. They're playing tonight. chose you. So just remember that, okay? But no, it's an honor to be here at the York School, and privileged for this opportunity to speak with you. And the area that I want to cover is sort of the timeline. And I can even use my example when I was applying to colleges back in the mid-90s to kind of demonstrate how the process has sort of shifted, and to the benefit of you all as well as your children. Obviously, right now we know that your son or daughters and are they're in the throes of submitting applications, correct? I would assume that they're looking at schools, whether it's early decision or early action, or just getting some of those rolling admission applications out there. It's currently going on. We know that some deadlines, are coming up. November 1, November 15, December 1, and a lot of these universities are going to start cranking out their decisions even prior to the holidays. Now, if you look at that timeline with August 1, the university applications opening, right below that, you're going to see that October 1, so about a month ago, the FAFSA opened up for U.S. citizens. Now, I don't know if you have children that are older who maybe applied to universities, I don't know exactly, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, but certainly when I was applying to colleges, the FAFSA, you couldn't even submit until the new year, okay? And it was kind of a frustrating process because, when I applied to colleges, I grew up in the state of Washington, got admitted into a couple of UCs. As an out-of-state student, I thought I was a big-timer, okay, thank you, all right? And then you just kind of sit in limbo for, 4 or 5 months until the springtime when you get your financial aid packages from the various universities that you've been admitted to. And I remember talking to my dad and saying, okay, it's March, it's late February, we got the financial aid packages from the UCs, how are we gonna pay for this? And he was like, we aren't paying for this, you are paying for this. And I ended up staying in state, and I had a great experience. I had the best college experience, but that's my first point, is these conversations about what your child is thinking and what you're thinking need to happen sooner than later. And now with the FAFSA being submitted earlier, it really kind of prompts you to have those. Because what we are starting to see is a lot of universities and colleges will actually roll out their financial aid award letters, including their loans, their scholarships, their grants, with their admissions packages, assuming that the student has the FAFSA already on file, okay? Now, I can't speak for every university, but like a school like the University of Redlands, if a student even applies in November with our early rounds of applications, they have the FAFSA on file, we start cranking out our admissions decision mid-December. With that, right behind the admissions letter, in their student portal and through the mail, they will have a very clear picture of what their financial aid award letter is, okay? And so you as parents, even in December, can really start having those conversations about what is financially feasible. Now, there are deadlines, so if you haven't submitted the FAFSA already, or it's not the next thing you do this weekend, that's perfectly fine. Just know that there are the deadlines coming right after the holidays. January 15th is the preferred deadline. It's something to take note of, because we know once Thanksgiving rolls around, it's going to be quite busy. This is not necessarily the time that we think about those things in December and late November. So really, I would say attack this process sooner than later when it's kind of fresh on your minds. Kind of do it simultaneously as your children are specifically applying to universities. Now, some universities might hold on to their financial aid and scholarship packets a little bit later, maybe until February or March. That still gives you plenty of time to visit those schools and make that final decision, which comes on May 1. So May 1 is that national decision deadline. Most universities adhere to that because they need to start planning appropriately and effectively for the fall. How many classes they're going to offer in this area, residence hall placement, etc. Universities can be flexible. So, if some universities might allow you an extension, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, to continue those conversations about finances and if we can afford our top choice as well. So don't be afraid to ask us that question about, is there any wiggle room with the May 1? Some universities might grant it, but it's on a very, case-by-case basis, okay? So these are some other tips related to the application process. Obviously, pay attention to deadlines, and it's so important to do. You live in a state, especially with the public universities, where if you apply late, no dice, okay? Deadlines have to be followed. What you're going to find, especially with scholarship applications, is we have plenty of them, of students who make that deadline, so giving you an extension or giving you a little grace just doesn't hold a lot of weight. Now, as Adam said, many of our universities have one application in the same. Your application for admission is the application for merit-based scholarship. So we're giving you or awarding you our best scholarship that we possibly can, but make sure that there's not other supplemental applications. Usually with something like creative arts scholarships, talent scholarships, music scholarships, there is going to be a separate application and deadlines. The other thing that's really important is remember that universities is a 4-year commitment, we hope, okay? There's some on the 5-year plan, I get it. That wasn't me, that was my sisters. But for the most part, students, I find, and maybe it's because we work with a lot of international students and they have to prove their financial ability to pay for 1 year, but sometimes they don't think about the 2nd year, the 3rd year, and the 4th year. But hopefully it's common knowledge and common sense that, this is going to be a 4-year commitment. And we haven't even touched on what graduate school might look like, or med school, or law school, etc. The other thing is make sure to stay in touch with all of us. Make sure you're asking a lot of questions. Our jobs is to maybe not necessarily provide you with the answer you want, but we're going to provide you with the answer that will help inform your decision. And then always be ready with your financial docs, especially if you are applying to universities that are need aware, for example. There are a lot of universities that are need aware. And those universities might need full need, they may not. It just really depends. And just be prepared for the financial implications of submitting your documents, turning them over to us in order to evaluation. Most universities are going to do their absolute best to provide their best package to you. Even though we are certainly not wealthy and we're just trying to maintain our financial health, believe me when I say we're going to do everything in our power to try to provide you with as much financial assistance and scholarships based on your EFC as possible. So, next one I believe is, okay, thank you.
So a few other tips, definitely be creative in college search. I know it's very easy to get hung up on big name schools. Everybody knows Berkeley, everybody wants UCLA. The schools are great for some kids, but also the admission rate for those universities now is absolutely insane. What was it for UCLA last year? 3 or 4%? What?
10%.
10%. That's insane. I think this year's going to be even more competitive, especially with more institutions either being test optional or test blind. So really be creative with the college search to make sure not only are you finding somewhere for your student to be a good fit on campus where they're going to be happy and successful, but it's also going to be a good financial fit for your family. So I know we talk about rankings. We all love rankings, we hate rankings, but one ranking that I do think is important is the best buy universities. These are universities that are generally going to be a great return on your investment, which means it's going to cost you some money, of course, but the chances of your student either getting a job very quickly, or going on to graduate school or professional school, and then being successful there, is very high. So it's not quite as big of a gamble as going somewhere where you're just not sure if your student's going to end up getting a job afterwards. Consider starting at a community college and transferring. You guys are so lucky to live in a state where you have amazing community colleges that have great agreements to get into not just the UCs and CSUs, but a lot of the great private institutions as well. This does not happen in every state. The states that I have lived and worked in, it's not as good as it is here. So you guys have that huge advantage here. Of course, starting at a university in your home country doesn't really apply to you guys, but they definitely could look at starting at a university local to you guys and then transferring somewhere afterwards. Especially if you guys are letting them stay at home. My parents told me very early in the process I was not to live at home, even though I was looking at a university 10 minutes away. They said I had to turn in my house key because they didn't even want me coming home to do laundry. So, I knew very early on that my parents were really pushing me out of the nest, which was fine. It was fine.
Was it fine?
And then, of course, looking at places and making sure you're asking questions as you're looking at different universities about what their housing policies are. There are a lot of universities that require students to live on campus, maybe the first year, first 2 years. My undergrad was the first 3 years. But for universities where you don't require it, maybe there's one of their classmates also going to that same university. Maybe see if they can get an apartment together. Try to find some creative ways like that to help save money. And then, of course, looking outside of the big cities sometimes. We all know, especially in California, San Francisco, LA, so expensive. Maybe not that there's a cheap place in California anywhere. But thinking about some of those places that are not quite inside the big cities, where apartments may be slightly less expensive, maybe public transportation is a little bit easier and a little bit less expensive. Then I think on the last side, so these are a couple useful websites when it comes to looking maybe for some additional scholarships and financial aid, as well as understanding more about like the NCAA policies, NAIA policies, if your kids are maybe the athletics route at all. So we are going to take a few minutes and let you guys ask some questions, but I'm going to start with some of the typical questions that you get. One of the top questions I get from parents: how do I know my EFC? Well, I will tell you, every university will calculate your EFC differently. So there is not just one number that magically comes out of FAFSA. Every university that you guys list on your FAFSA will get your financial aid information, and we will determine what your EFC looks like to us. But you can go on our website. Every university that gets federal money, so every accredited university in the U.S., legally has to have a financial aid calculator on their website. Go run that calculator. It's called the net price calculator. It will give you a pretty good idea of what that university is going to cost for you. It's not going to be perfect, but it can give you a pretty good estimate before you submit your FAFSA. Another question I commonly get is how much does tuition change or go up every year? We as institutions have to, of course, adjust for the cost of inflation. We have to keep our lights on. So tuition generally will go up every year. I would say on average it's about 3%. Some years I've seen it go as high as 5%. But do plan as you're looking at your 4-year budget that is going to go up a little bit. Another common question is, my financial aid going to be the same every single year? No. that come. However, if you have a significant change in that year, such as if one of you changes jobs, or you lose your job, or something else happens, financial aid offices generally have a separate form called a special circumstances form. Reach out to the financial aid office, ask them if they've taken into account special circumstances. They'll generally get you this form you can fill out, and then they may be able to adjust your financial aid based off of some, one-off circumstance. Especially in COVID, we've had a lot of these where one parent has lost a job, but you're using prior year data, which shows that both parents, may be employed. So we do take these things into account. Okay, so what other questions? Yeah.
So for admission in 2022,
Yes.
what tax year is the tax based on? Is that 2020 or 2021?
2012. I am also not a math major, but the prior, the 2020.
2020.
Yes.
That's new. Well,
Like 2-3 years.
Yeah.
It's relatively new at this point.
Yeah.
It's all prior. So.
I would think with COVID that you guys are going to see a lot.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So look at my university, we actually have 2 separate special circumstances forms, one specific to COVID and one the normal one, just because of that exactly. Yeah, great question. What other questions do you guys have?
This might be more of a question that I need to talk to FAFSA about, but I have one student in college already, done FAFSA. I got a second one coming in. The linking of those two, how does that affect? I've seen, it says that, it'll be adjusted when you start getting 2 students in college. From your perspective, how does that change? And also, how do I calculate it?
So when you do submit your FAFSA, it does tell us on our end that you do have a second child in college. So there is that. Getting them to link, I will say one of the good things about FAFSA is that they are incredibly responsive. And they have a great chat system where parents usually can get a pretty fast answer. The caveat to this is that the FAFSA opens October 1st. Usually for the first 2 or 3 weeks, it is the worst system. It crashes, they find a lot of bugs, there's just a lot of issues. So I talk to a lot of parents who are very eager to do it on October 1st because they think they need to do it on October 1st. I say, hold on. Wait 3 weeks, or a little bit more if you can. Let all the bugs work out, and then work on it. So I think now, if you were to go back in and ask them, they would probably get it fixed pretty quickly. Yeah.
That was my actual question. Is there any, key system where you don't have to do it on October 1st in order to somehow have a place in the line or something?
No.
So I would recommend as far as actually filing FAFSA, March 2nd is the absolute latest day I would do it. The reason why, specifically for California, is the California State Aid Commission, or what we call CSAT, they do need to see the financial information to determine if your child is eligible for a California state grant if they end up enrolling at a California, a school in California. So March 2nd is the absolute latest day that I would recommend filing that FAFSA. So that's the priority deadline. But yes, October 1's the first day. I would say that you definitely want to have it done by March 2nd.
Okay, so there's no particular advantage in doing it tomorrow versus December 1st, for example?
No.
Generally, no. There could be some institutions, there's always a catch, or always the few outliers, right? So there are some institutions that are going to be need aware, and they do ask that you complete the FAFSA, on the application timeline. But I will say they're very good at making sure you know this. But this is not the norm. The norm is that most universities are going to say, we prefer if you do it by January 15th. In California, the hard deadline. So there's no difference if you did it yesterday versus if you do it over Thanksgiving.
But to Kelly's point, there sometimes can be an advantage to file earlier because for like a rolling admission institution like a Laverne or Redlands, and then Kelly's got rounds. If your son or daughter is admitted in one of the earlier rounds, like in November, and have a FAFSA on file, that financial aid offer will go out earlier.
still be 20 for FAFSA?
My other question about one student versus two in college, in terms of financial aid packages and how universities look at that.
So it does, we do take into account that you do have multiple children in college. Every university is going to take that differently now in terms of what it actually means for your financial aid, of course. But it is something that we do get the information of that, you know, your multiple kids in college.
Yeah, so similar to that, then, I always find it interesting because we went through and we haven't submitted it, but just started answering the questions, and they don't ask if you have a child in an independent school, so my oldest is just now starting to apply, and, you know, my son is a sophomore, so then we now, if you're looking at this as a 4-year commitment, now, you know, I'm kind of running like numbers in my head, like, what are these, this scenario is going to be rolling on for 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I know you said that the EFC is calculated differently at each school, but right now I'm like, okay, I can kind of get an estimate. And I'm guessing, I think a lot of parents are, is there just even a rule of thumb where you can take a percentage and apply it to your adjusted gross income and just come up with a rough EFC, which I know you're not.
Yeah, I mean, it gets kind of tricky. The best thing I would recommend is going back to the net price calculator. So every school's financial aid website has to have a net price calculator. There are some questions that you will need to answer, but as long as, you know, most institutions are pretty good at updating it because they don't want angry phone calls saying, you know, I filled this out, you gave me this, and now you're telling me this. So that usually is a pretty good way to get a rough estimate of what, you know, the cost would be given the scenarios of multiple children in school, or if you've got other children attending an independent school or secondary school, and that I would recommend is the best way to kind of get that idea as ballpark what we're looking at.
Okay, yeah, so I'm just kind of running my own scenarios and
Yeah, it's just
different ways and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's really going to depend, you know, on the schools that you're looking at, you know, of course, but the public California schools, you know, they're more, it's going to be really federal, it's really going to be based off the FAFSA, not like the Cal States and UC don't necessarily merit scholarships the way private schools in California do, because they're, you know, you got the in-state tuition thing, which goes back to Logan's point about, you know, $150,000 tuition, $50,000 scholarship.
The other thing I would add to that is that financial aid offices, they specialize in understanding financial aid and working with families. So even as maybe your child already has their short list of universities that they're applying to, it's okay for you to reach out and set up an appointment to chat with that financial aid office and say, with similar family situations in the past or even like last year, you know, what did the financial aid packet look like roughly? And they can give you also a pretty good estimate and talk you through options as well to help you think through some of these things. So definitely don't ever be afraid to reach out to the financial aid office.
Yeah.
If we have a student who's interested in a ROTC scholarship,
Oh,
how does that play into the whole FAFSA thing?
Yeah.
Or is FAFSA just a hands down, every parent on the planet fills out this form across the board, no exceptions, no excuses? And how does it stack, like, how does that stack with what could potentially be a ROTC scholarship?
So for ROTC, my biggest piece of advice is make sure the universities that you guys are considering that you are reaching out to that ROTC director now if you haven't already. Because they have early deadlines for some of their scholarships through the government. Some of them, like for us, I think that deadline is even just after coming up, and then you have some additional institutional ones as well that are a little bit later. But I believe you do have to fill out the FAFSA for ROTC. But definitely be in touch with those directors as soon as possible. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add. We get a lot of ROTC facilities. Yeah, in the branch. They have.
Because I thought somebody said that FAFSA was only required if you're applying for financial aid. So if you're covering all expenses through scholarships, is the FAFSA then required?
That's a good question.
Some colleges require, for merit scholarships or less, they still just want their FAFSA
Yeah.
completed.
So the best advice
So-
is
Just do
what
it.
you're banking on.
Yeah.
It's
There's also a
proven
lot
to-
of
Also, too, plans change,
Yeah.
and that help, things like federal Pell Grants, California Pell Grants, that's a finite amount of money, so if you don't have your name in the hat, it's easy to turn it down later, but
Right.
you can't get it.
If when you get your financial aid packet, if it lists those loans and stuff on there, and you don't want that, you just tell the financial aid office you don't want that, and they take it off. I think a lot of families, sometimes I hear like, oh, we think we make too much money that we wouldn't get anything, so we're not gonna fill it out. I said, that's stupid, you could be leaving free money on the table. It's not going to hurt you to fill it out. Yes, it's a pain in the butt. If you have
14 minutes.
to go, yeah, it really could take you as little as 14, 15 minutes. But I will tell you, I've heard of institutions that even if you fill it out, they will just give you a little bit of grant money, guaranteed. Even if you make a lot of money. I probably shouldn't tell you guys that. But
I'd like to kind of start with go a little bit general and then allow for like maybe one or two more questions because we are coming up to the 7 o'clock hour. And the first is kind of like the timeline thing. Some takeaways that I have is have a conversation about finances sooner than later. That's really important. So thank you for saying that. Second is also it doesn't have to be a big dramatic conversation either. Students apply. The family applies for financial aid. They're going to get some rejections, so you no longer have to talk about those schools. And they're going to get some acceptances and get financial aid award offers, and they're going to be maybe very different and all over the map. And then you start having conversations with those on the table. Again, as far as timeline goes, next, after this application season, for the smaller scholarships, the local community organizations start contacting me. We're talking Kiwanis and Rotary and Elks Club and the Wine Pickers Association of California, and I send those directly to the students. There's great Italian American scholarships and Daughters of the American Revolution, all these different scholarships, and I send those straight to the students. Does this fit you? You might want to read this. Are you interested in this? And those local ones, that kind of comes through the winter and into the spring. And that's $200 here, $1,000 there, and it really adds up. And then there's also this middle class squeeze that's kind of a problem where, low income families I've seen get some great packages, right, with Cal grants and other things coming through. It's pretty nice. And then of course families that have enough money, they're taking care of business with their finances. It's this middle class that gets the squeeze that's really hard. And colleges are aware of that. So one example is the UCs, where they do have a middle class scholarship. And it's for families that make approximately $190,000 a year can qualify for scholarships. So that's pretty nice to hear too. And then there's this interesting situation that your student gets accepted to a name-brand school, and it's going to cost a lot of money for them to go to. And then they get accepted to a different tier school, and they get like a full ride. And then it's like, okay, son or daughter, this is going to cost the family hundreds of thousands of dollars for this. That's worth it. Let's do it. This is what we want to do. You're going to make a lot of money after graduating from that school. We'll do that. We're all in. And then I've seen a lot of families make the decision of, this school is a full ride. You've got a merit scholarship there. Maybe not everybody in the family's heard of the name, but it's small. You have access to research, professors, and you're not going to own anything when you graduate. And I've seen students, here at York within the last couple of years, make that decision too. And that's a very prudent decision as well. Not one isn't better than the other, it's a family decision. But it's a pretty interesting conversation to witness, so which way they go.
Especially since we're graduate school.
That's, they factor that in. It's like, okay, you can afford to go get your PhD or your master's, and we didn't spend all of our savings And so let's, maybe just a couple more questions. I know you've had one, and then we'll go to Melanie, and then.
So financial aid will run out. Is that true for most situations? Like, if they go beyond 4 years, if they become super seniors or super duper seniors, financial aid will run out, right?
Depends.
What's that?
So, I was a super senior, because I chose to have 2 majors, a minor, study abroad, started as chemistry pre-med, changed to business and international development. I still got my financial aid fifth year. So it's just going to depend on the institution and their policies. I think, yeah.
Louis. Yes. That's probably it.
Yeah. So I've worked for so WUI is called the Western Undergraduate Exchange. Basically, and I've worked for WUI universities in the past. And basically what it comes down to is, let's take students in Montana, for example, who are limited in higher education opportunities. Maybe they can't get a tourism degree or a specific kind of program, but they can get it in Idaho, okay, or Washington. Same with Idaho and Nevada. Students there have very limited opportunities as opposed to maybe a student in California or Connecticut, etc. So basically, when we came out of that, it was a way to expand children's higher education opportunities beyond their own state that were limited, lack of population, lack of higher education opportunities. If you are from Wyoming, you got one university for a year, that's it, okay? Now, WUI is basically now has morphed into something where colleges in what is called the WICHI states, which is a consortium of the 14 states, including Guam and the Northern Marianas Islands and Hawaii. Public universities can decide if they want to participate in this program, and then it's how do they participate. So a school like the University of Oregon, when I was there, treated WUI more like a scholarship. They only allowed 30 students a year to come in on the WUI. Other Oregon universities, like Southern Oregon University, says anybody from any of the Western undergraduate exchange states, California, Nevada, Hawaii, Northern Marianas Islands, can go there, and they will qualify. How much of it is 150% of resident tuition, okay? Typically, if your son or daughter from California goes to Southern Oregon University, and let's say resident tuition is $8,000, you would pay $12,000. Is that right? Yeah, 150%. Student from Kentucky would pay probably about 3 times as much of that resident tuition, so like $24,000. Typically, under WUI, statures, they don't allow you to combine other scholarships.
So each university basically sets the parameters to how many WUI student grants they're going to.
It might be limited by major as well.
And many of them are, and you may not know that because many of them are very loose with their requirements, but there are a couple of universities that have very tight restrictions around WUI. Those, what I would say, are really popular non-resident schools, like University of Washington, University of Oregon, if they even participate in that program. I don't believe the University of California is even participating in that for kids in Idaho or Alaska, etc. But it's a fantastic deal, if you're looking at a school in Idaho or Wyoming,
Oregon State says maybe only about 10% of the applicants get it.
There you go.
That's why I started wondering, it's like, wait a minute. Wait.
Yeah.
That's why I started getting confused, like how they.
You could go to a website, I don't know what it is, the WICHI website, WICHE or WUI outside of their university, but, yes.
With merit scholarships, when a student is comparing, universities once they're accepted, is there any negotiation between schools and, because I saw one website that says, we do not negotiate, don't even ask. So when it comes down to the nitty-gritty.
So, typically no. I would say, that's the typical policy is universities are putting their very best award out there. Now, I also don't want to lose a student to another university if it's just coming down to a few thousand. So maybe there is some negotiation or an opportunity for me to contact our financial aid award or our financial award letter, or financial office, and say, hey, this student might need a little bit more support, okay? Is there anything we can do in the way of like an additional university grant or, a work employment or grant or something like that? Now, rarely I feel like does it ever come down to $1,000 or $2,000 in my case or what I've seen. But yeah, typically the merit scholarships are pretty firm, but it doesn't hurt to ask, and maybe there's a little wiggle room with university grants.
I would say I'm not surprised that you saw the university website. I feel like it'll probably become more popular because in the last year or so, or 2 or 3 years, I guess, there's a big rumor going around that everything is negotiable. I am in this Facebook group for parents trying to figure out how to pay for college. And it always kind of cracks me up when I see parents saying everything's negotiable. Scholarships are negotiable. Financial aid is negotiable. But maybe a little, depending on the institution. But as Henley said, we really try to put our best offer out there to you. Also, we don't have money trees. We don't have an infinite amount of money. I think a lot of people get confused or don't really understand what an endowment is. It doesn't mean that it's an unlimited bank account where we just have millions of dollars that we can pull out, scholarships out of. It's not how it works. And so, yeah, maybe $1,000 or $2,000, maybe.
Yeah, it wouldn't be it.
But
I think the only thing I can say to that is, sometimes there might, if there is wiggle room, it takes an admission officer like a Kenley, like a Dane, to call financial aid, hey, this student has been engaged in the process, they've been to every event, we've met multiple times, and that goes back to the concept of what we call demonstrated interest. Demonstrated interest. Your son or daughter has called us and we want to go study with you, right? It's because, and so an admission officer may be more inclined to go to bat for your child if we've been in contact with your child through the whole process, right? We get a lot of what we call stealth applications. The student applies, they get admitted, but we've never heard from the student, we've never communicated with the student, and if we just heard from the student in April saying, I need more money, but we get a lot of those requests, we can't go to bat for every single student. As humans, we're probably going to be more inclined to go to bat for that student who we've spoken with the counselor, the student has called us, like emailed us with a question, want to know, right? Because for us, this is also, we need to enroll in class, right? So again, it sometimes happens, not frequently, but I would say again, you need to make sure you've been engaged with the school you're really interested in.
One more question? Sure.
I'm so curious about the early decision issue. You talked about, so now you're locked in, do you know why?
It is a contract.
Yeah.
It is a
No,
contract.
but I mean,
Yeah.
you're locked in, but then how does that work with financial aid? If you're would you then have a tendency to offer it to one of the students who you want to entice because now this person's locked in?
I would say the university is so we start thinking about the admission cycle very early in the year. We start thinking about the numbers that we need of ED applications, what percentage we need to admit, what percentage of that percentage is going to end up enrolling. And we plan out of that year way in advance. So is there a little bit of a game of knowing we may not offer as much financial aid to
universities. But I also understand if a student has really, really fallen in love with the university and they know that that's where it's at, then, you know, it could be a great option for them. That said, the one out of an ED contract is if the financial aid offer comes back vastly different than what you were initially running on your net price calculator, but you have to have all of this documented. So if you have a student applying to ED, you know, somewhere in ED, run the net price calculator, screenshot everything and save it. Talk to a financial aid office,
Guidance counselor.
talk to the guidance counselor, talk to the admissions officer, document everything. Because that way, if the financial aid comes out very different and it really truly is not affordable, that is the only out to an ED contract. Otherwise, you're stuck.
The caveat with that too is if you are admitted to ED, like if you are admitted to ED in December, the expectation is that your son or daughter will withdraw.
Every application, that is it.
So then, if later the financial aid doesn't work out, then if they've got no other applications,
Yeah.
so it is, yeah, so
Especially in a lot of ED schools, you don't find out until March or April if you're admitted. And that's also when you find out your financial aid. And that doesn't give you a lot of time before
If they
you
need to
first
be-
to get it all together.
it goes back to Ken's budget.
Okay, so I want to honor the deadline and thank everybody for coming. This is,
We do have a couple pamphlets and business cards,
All that fun stuff.
and we have friends in the field, couple, so we just want to be good to you, whether it's Redlands or Kowloon or wherever you're looking at, you know, let us connect you, okay? So,
We're here to help.
thanks for coming out.
Thank you.